I'm Jeff Mann. I'm an artist, a welder. I work with car parts, and I have worked with car parts because I believe there's too many cars in the world is one part of it, and I think we should be more aware of what we're doing with cars. And the other thing is, I just find car parts fascinating. They're amazing parts. They're parts I could never do anything with, make myself, so I get to play with them. And the fact that there's millions of each part lends to the idea of chopping them and working directly with them rather than worrying about, oh, am I making the right cut all the time? Most of the parts I get are from transmission shops. I find that junkyards really aren't that great to get parts from, partly because they worry about insurance, obviously, or stuff like that, but also because the parts in a transmission shop have already been taken out, and so I have the chance to use them. And those are actually the parts that are most interesting to me in general. So for instance, here you can see what's called a valve body, the top of a valve body on this piece, and it's part of an automatic transmission. Incredibly complex piece of aluminum. I could never make it in my entire lifetime as such a complex piece. So I get to take these parts that engineers design and rework them for art. And now some of this is shovels, so you're going to see some shovel blades here mixed into the pieces because I just love shovel blades and I can't stay away from them. And there's another little part here, the mustache is part of part of the clutch of an automatic transmission. And I should say, I know a fair amount about cars, but I know sometimes I don't get my details quite right, so I get corrected here and there, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that. And over here you can see this is a clutch housing right here. And they're really, really beautiful. And this is actually the dashboard out of an old pickup truck from probably like the 50s or something like that. And farther over, that's actually, believe it or not, it's a muffler. They have new mufflers now that are incredibly complex, especially in trucks. And so you'll see a lot of amazing shapes in them. And then I've added some other parts. And I don't even know what some of these parts are, but this is an exhaust pipe here that's added on here. I'm not really sure what this part goes to here. And so part of it was, I come from Maine originally, and Maine actually had a referendum process, and they did a stop the widening of the turnpike as a referendum, and it actually won. And so they did stop for a while the turnpike. And so I kind of got into the political side that way. And also I got into the car part side because I was hired by a technical college to convert to a community college, and that also tells you I'm from the States because I don't think you have those particular things here. And in the process, I did a van, a traveling theater van, and I made dummies with television heads and all that kind of stuff, but we tore the whole van out and cleaned it out entirely of all the parts, so it was really lightweight and easy to move around. And in the process, I ran around all these amazing parts, and I just said, I got to use these things. And so that's kind of, those are the two sides of kind of how I work. The problem for me, if you want to call it that, a little bit of a conundrum, is I like to work directly by response. And so I take a car part and I look at it and I see, what does it do? How's it going to work? And I'm going to grab a mask right here to show you a little bit of that. So for instance, this is part of an exhaust system right here, and they look, it's beautiful woven metal, but they look pretty straightforward and plain, and I never realized until I pulled them off that I could shape them as how I wanted them. And once I saw I could shape them, my response was, okay, kind of like a horn or something like that, kind of rhinoceros-like. And that's the idea, is I'll respond to something and get a sense of how it might work. And for this, this could have worked flipped upside down in some ways too, so I can see the possibility there, but this one had the stronger feeling to me, and so that's why I went this way. The surface, I had no idea what it was going to be when I start, because I don't work with color right away. I add that later. And this piece here is part of a transmission. I cut out, flattened, and used like that. Yeah, I guess you could, there's a lot to that, but one part I'd say is I kind of want to honor all the energy that went into making the car and the use of that car. It seems a shame to me that we throw them out all the time. You go to a junkyard and it's just millions of cars being thrown away. In the States, I think it's like 11 million cars a year are ditched. So you can roughly figure 1/10 for Canada, about that number. They have all these amazing parts in them, and the idea that they just are thrown away like old shoes just seems like an incredible waste to me. It feels like we should do so much more with them. So this is my way of both honoring the parts and honoring what went into them. And also hoping to make people aware of what we're doing with cars, because we are in a world now where we're living more as in a carscape and less in a landscape. And I think we have blinders on around that. We don't see what we're sort of doing to the world, and I want us to be more aware of that. Now, it's a little hard looking at these masks to get that awareness, so many times I accompany my shows with information about cars and try and encourage people to think about them. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying owning a car is bad. I'm not saying driving is bad. We live in a car world. And for most of us, we need a car to exist unless you're in a city, you know. And so that's not the problem. The problem is, can we reconstruct our world to make it less, so we don't need cars as much? Good question. I think part of it is, you know, artists don't like limits. And that's sort of too bad, because I think within the limit you can be incredibly creative. You don't have to have the perfect paint. You don't have to have the perfect part. You don't have to be in control as much. It's more how creative you are, and that goes back to the idea of response, you know. I do a lot of workshops with printing t-shirts with car parts and tires, and some people find it very frustrating to start with because it's not controllable. We work wet on wet all the time, constantly wet on wet. So the pieces will get slightly different colors on them, and then when they print them, they'll mush a little and get different colors too. And for a lot of people, they want that control, and I think control's a little overrated. I shouldn't say, I should say everything's fine. You know, what everybody does is fine. I just think there should be more room for kind of that, a little bit of sloppiness maybe in there, if you want to call it that. So in the nature of recycling stuff, there is going to be a certain amount of sloppiness. You may not get exactly the part you want. That part may have a bolt welded onto it that you can't get off without damaging the piece, you know. So it's responding as well as imposing, if you want to call it that. That's a tough one, because I think there's a certain group of people who accept we need to think more about what we're doing with cars. And obviously a lot of people, you know, they ride bikes, they walk, take public transit, and that's great. You know, that is a really solid and significant piece of what we probably should ultimately be doing. I don't like to turn people off too much. One show I had some pretty big messages on the wall along with my pieces, and a friend of mine saw the show, and she really felt like because she drove, she felt guilty, you know? And I didn't want that. You know, I don't want people to feel guilty. I want them to just think and plan for something in the future that's different, or that we all have the option to choose differently if we want to. Yeah, it's tough. People do talk a lot about what they've done or what they're trying to do about cars, or their awareness that, oh yeah, I shouldn't drive as much as I do, but I don't know what to do. So there's a lot of ignorance maybe about other possibilities, but also it's really hard. Like, I live in Kingston, and the bus service is great, but it's not, you know, it doesn't cover all the areas. And so if you had a job somewhere that wasn't on the route, you know, it could be really tough for you. I try and avoid the sense of attacking people. I think the way, I was a mediator for years, and one of the ways to possibly focus on the solution to a problem was to talk about the future. As a way of those people not being locked into their conflict, but to say, how could this work next time this happened? Or how can this work in the future? You know? And if you look at it that way, that's where I'm focused, because all the things that people do to try and help our transportation system and live environmentally friendly is great, absolutely great, and I don't want to take anything away from that at all. Along with that, I think it's very important that the society plan, that we have something like reduce, reuse, recycle, which is now everywhere. We should have that for transportation. Whether, you know, whatever it is, I don't know what it's going to be, but something like that. So people can look at it and say, oh yeah, if I don't drive, that's higher up on the hierarchy. That's where I should be, and not down here, which is driving wisely. Great, it's great to have a fuel-efficient car. Better would be to not drive, or to drive less. You know, so maybe we could have some kind of hierarchy like that. So that's where I think we can engage people. I think we can engage developers in that. If we say, in 20 years, we're not going to build a highway to meet that capacity. We're going to plan to build our development along a corridor. And you as the developer, in 20 years, we'll deliver people to you. We won't deliver cars to you. As a society, we can do that. which right now we do the opposite. We say, oh, you want to build that building or that mall, and we have traffic problems, you have to put in a stop sign, you have to put in a curb cut, you have to build a limited highway or whatever it is, and we help with that. And I think that's where we should stop and say we're not going to increase our capacity. And maybe that's part of that hierarchy too, is no more vehicular capacity out there. We're going to stop it at some point and say, okay, that's it, no more, and now we're going to work down, kind of like carbon emissions. They're going to try and draw a line and say no more beyond that point. As an artist, and this is kind of wandering away from cars a little bit, but I really do believe we should look a lot more at response. And again, I don't want to say that all the ways people approach art is great. It's really great. I feel response is a little undervalued, and I like the idea of being a little less heady about stuff and being more about feeling. And so I hope that more art is like that people are willing to have faith that their response will show. It may take time. For me, sometimes I leave a piece up on the wall for a year before it finally finishes because I don't feel it for a while. So I guess I'm just put a little plug in for a little less heady approach to art all the time and take some chances, respond to stuff, and see what happens.